They say silence is golden, but Grace Smith discovered it was worth something far more valuable when she stepped off a private jet 6 months later and watched her ex-husband's world shatter in real time. Everyone in the tech world knew Raymond Adams had won. He had the elite attorneys, the ironclad prenup, and a PR machine that could rewrite history before breakfast. He left his wife Grace with absolutely nothing except a single suitcase and a name no one would remember. He expected her to fade into obscurity. He expected her to beg for scraps. What he didn't expect was for her to return flanked by forces that made his billion-dollar empire look like pocket change, standing on the same courthouse steps where he'd planned to declare victory. This isn't just a divorce story. This is the story of how the woman who said nothing became the one everyone had to hear. Before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and stay with us till the end of this journey. Thank you for being here. The rain in San Francisco wasn't romantic. It was the kind of steady drizzle that soaked through wool and made windshields blur into abstract paintings of city lights. Grace studied her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alteza, the kind of restaurant where reservations required 6 weeks' notice and entrees cost more than her monthly student loan payment used to be. She looked composed. Her dress was simple charcoal gray, the same one she'd worn to Raymond's last product launch. He'd told her once that it made her look like she belonged in boardrooms instead of beside him. She'd thought it was a compliment. The folder sat between them on the white tablecloth like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Raymond Adams looked exactly like a man who'd won. His suit was bespoke Brioni, his watch was understated Patek Philippe, and his smile carried the easy confidence of someone who'd already calculated every possible outcome. He'd chosen this restaurant deliberately, public enough to prevent a scene, exclusive enough to remind her of everything she was losing access to. The other diners pretended not to notice them, but Grace saw the occasional glance, the whispered recognition. Raymond thrived on being seen. "I want this to be clean," Raymond said, sliding the folder across the pristine tablecloth. His fingers were steady, practiced. No lawyers dragging this out for months, no media circus, just two adults who had a good run and are moving forward. Grace opened the folder. The settlement agreement was 63 pages, but the prenuptial clause that mattered was on page 4. She'd memorized it years ago during a sleepless night after their first real argument. If the marriage dissolved before 7 years, the non-titled spouse received no equity stake, no alimony, no claim to intellectual property developed during the marriage. Raymond's father had insisted on it. Raymond had promised her it would never matter. 5 years and 8 months. They'd been married 5 years and 8 months. "You'll walk away clean," Raymond continued, his tone somewhere between reassurance and instruction. "No complications, no contested assets. Adams Dynamics stays whole." Adams Dynamics, the company she'd helped name during a wine-fueled brainstorming session in their old apartment, back when Raymond was still coding in a bedroom office and taking investor meetings in coffee shops. The company whose first pitch deck she'd edited 17 times. The company whose crisis management strategy she'd drafted when their lead developer quit 3 days before their Series A presentation. The company that, according to these papers, she had contributed nothing to. Grace read faster than Raymond expected. She caught details he assumed she'd gloss over. The accelerated timeline that required her signature within 72 hours. The non-disclosure clause that prevented her from discussing any aspect of marital finances or business operations. The liquidated damages provision that would bankrupt her if she violated it. "There's a rush clause," Grace said quietly. Raymond's smile tightened by a fraction. "Standard inclusion. The merger timeline requires clean documentation." Merger. He'd mentioned it casually 3 weeks ago, the way someone might mention plans to repaint the kitchen. A merger with Helix Technologies that would value Adams Dynamics at $2.3 billion. A merger that required no complicated marital entanglements. A merger that needed her gone before due diligence went deep. "I'll sign," Grace said. The words landed in the space between them like stones in still water. Raymond blinked. Once. Twice. His hand had been moving toward his wine glass and it froze midway. He'd prepared for resistance, for tears and accusations, for threats to call her own lawyers. He'd even prepared, she suspected, for a public breakdown that his PR team could reshape into a narrative about emotional instability. "You understand what this means?" Raymond asked, and Grace heard the edge beneath his studied calm. Confusion, suspicion, the faint metallic taste of a plan going too smoothly. "Yes," Grace replied, meeting his eyes with the same steady calm she'd perfected during 5 years of investor dinners and board meetings where she'd been introduced as Raymond's wife, and never by name. "It means you're in a hurry." Something flickered across Raymond's face. Not quite fear, not quite anger, something sharper and more primitive, the recognition that she'd seen something he'd wanted hidden. But it passed quickly, smoothed over by practiced charm. "I think we've both been ready to move on for a while," he said, recovering his tone. "This just makes it official." Grace signed on page 63 where the witness lines waited. Her signature looked small in the designated space, almost apologetic. Raymond exhaled, actually exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath. He signed beneath her name with a flourish, then immediately gestured for the server. "We should celebrate," he said. "Closure deserves a toast." "I need to go," Grace said, already closing the folder. She stood before he could respond, before the champagne he'd undoubtedly ordered could arrive. The other diners glanced over with poorly disguised curiosity, the discarded wife making her exit, the failed marriage dissolving over appetizers. She could already imagine the headlines Raymond's team would plant. Tech CEO Raymond Adams finalizes amicable divorce. Grace Smith steps back from public life. The rain hit her the moment she stepped outside, cold and immediate and cleansing in a way the expensive air conditioning inside never could be. The valet didn't rush to help her. She wasn't that kind of patron anymore. She walked 3 blocks before she let herself stop beneath an awning, before she let her hands shake. Grace pulled out her phone and opened the folder she'd been compiling for 3 weeks. Screenshots of Adams Dynamics organizational documents, board meeting minutes she'd photographed while Raymond showered, email chains about the Helix merger that Raymond had left open on the home office computer, and one file, encrypted, password protected, labeled only contingency, that she'd found buried in Raymond's personal server. She'd sign his papers. She'd disappear from his carefully constructed narrative. She'd let him think silence meant surrender. But Grace Smith had learned something important during 5 years of being underestimated. The quietest person in the room was often the one paying the closest attention, and she'd been paying attention to everything. Her phone buzzed, unknown number, she almost didn't answer. Grace Smith, a woman's voice professional and clipped. "Yes. My name is Catherine Wells. I represent the SEC's Division of Enforcement. We'd like to discuss some irregularities in Adams Dynamics financial disclosures. Specifically, several documents bearing your signature." Grace's blood went cold. Documents she'd never signed, signatures that looked exactly like hers, and suddenly Raymond's rush made perfect, terrible sense. "When can we meet?" Grace asked, her voice steadier than her hands. She wasn't just erased from Raymond's story. She'd been written into a different one entirely, one where she took the fall. The credit card declined at a coffee shop on 3rd Street. Grace stared at the screen, watching the transaction fail for the second time. The barista, a kid with bleached hair and patient eyes, tried to smile reassuringly. "Sometimes the chip reader acts up. You want to try again?" She tried her backup card, declined. Then her personal account debit card, declined. "I'm sorry," Grace said, stepping away from the counter. "I'll come back." She didn't come back. Outside, she pulled up her banking app with shaking fingers. The account that had held $3,847 that morning, her personal savings untouched by the divorce settlement, now showed a balance of zero. Not frozen, not restricted, zeroed out with a notation, account closed per legal order. She called the bank's customer service line and spent 40 minutes navigating automated menus before reaching a human being. Mrs. Adams. Smith, Grace corrected, Grace Smith. A pause, keyboard clicking. I'm sorry, Miss Smith. The account closure was executed by court order following your divorce settlement. All joint accounts were dissolved, and individual accounts associated with marital assets were transferred according to the decree. That account wasn't marital, Grace said, keeping her voice level despite the panic climbing her throat. It was opened before I was married. It's in my name only. More clicking, a longer pause. I'm seeing here that the account was flagged as containing transferred funds from Adams Dynamics during the marriage. The order specified any account with commingled assets. Commingled assets. Raymond had transferred $5,000 to that account 2 years ago as a birthday gift. $5,000 out of 3 years of deposits, and it had poisoned the entire account. Where did the funds go? Grace asked. I'm not authorized to provide that information. You'll need to contact the legal team listed on the order. The legal team was Raymond's firm. Of course it was. Grace hung up and stood on the sidewalk while people flowed around her like water around a stone. She had $23 in cash in her wallet. No active credit cards. No access to the joint accounts she'd never really controlled anyway. She checked her email, hopping for something from her own attorney, the one she'd consulted once, tentatively, before Raymond served papers. The email bounced back. This account has been deactivated. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. Grace, building management, informed me your lease wasn't renewed. You have 30 days per the original terms. Let me know if you need a reference. She hadn't chosen to not renew. She received no notice. Grace walked 12 blocks to the Adams Dynamics office before she remembered she didn't work there anymore. She'd never officially worked there. Raymond had insisted it would be cleaner to keep her consulting informal, paid through personal accounts, never on the books. It had seemed romantic once, like they were partners beyond paperwork. Now she understood it meant she'd never existed there at all. She stopped across the street anyway, watching people flow in and out of the glass entrance. People she'd advised. People whose presentations she'd edited. People who'd asked her opinion on strategy and messaging and crisis management. Her phone rang. She almost didn't recognize the number, then realized Jennifer Cow. Her former classmate from Stanford, now a VP at a venture capital firm. Someone who might still remember Grace as herself, not just Raymond's discarded wife. Jennifer, Grace answered, trying to sound normal. How are you? Grace, hey. Jennifer's voice was careful, too careful. I got your email about the consulting opportunity. Grace hadn't sent an email about consulting. I'm glad you saw it. Yeah, listen, I wanted to call personally instead of just. The thing is, we're not looking for external consultants right now. Budget freeze, you understand. Of course, Grace said. And Grace, I probably shouldn't say this, but someone from Adams Dynamics' legal team reached out to our general counsel. Something about an NDA you signed. They were pretty clear that you're not supposed to be discussing any business operations or strategy that might relate to work you did during your marriage. The non-disclosure clause, the one buried on page 47 of the settlement, the one that effectively prevented her from marketing the only professional skills she had. They contacted your company, Grace asked. They're being thorough, Jennifer said, and Grace heard the apology in her voice. Look, I'm sorry. I know this is a weird situation. Maybe in 6 months when things cool down. It's fine, Grace said. Thanks for calling. She ended the call before Jennifer could offer more empty sympathy. The apartment Grace found was in the Tenderloin, sandwiched between a corner store with barred windows and a residential hotel that advertised weekly rates. It was 400 square feet, with water stains on the ceiling and a radiator that clanked like it was digesting metal. The deposit took most of her cash. She'd signed the lease under G. Smith because her full name was already starting to carry weight she couldn't afford. She'd been erased, methodically, completely, and the precision of it suggested Raymond had been planning this long before he'd served the papers. Grace unpacked her single suitcase and let herself remember. 3 years ago, Adams Dynamics had been hemorrhaging users after a security breach exposed customer data. Raymond had been paralyzed, convinced the company was finished. Grace had been the one who drafted the response strategy, not Raymond, not his COO or his PR team. Grace, working through the night at their kitchen table, had written the apology that salvaged the company's reputation. She'd structured the compensation plan. She'd personally called their 20 largest clients to walk them through the new security protocols. Raymond had delivered the final presentation, his face on the news, his quotes in TechCrunch, his company saved. And when it was over, he'd kissed her and said, "You're brilliant, you know that." She'd thought it meant partnership. 2 years ago, Adams Dynamics had been negotiating with a Chinese manufacturing firm that kept moving the goalposts. Raymond had wanted to walk away. Grace had spent 6 weeks learning Mandarin basics, researching cultural negotiation styles, identifying the real decision-maker 3 levels deep in the corporate structure. She'd been the one who realized the sticking point wasn't price, it was face. She'd restructured the proposal to let the Chinese team present it as their innovation. The deal closed. Adams Dynamics secured manufacturing at half the projected cost. Raymond's photo appeared in Forbes' 30 Under 30 issue. The article mentioned his instinctive understanding of global markets. Grace wasn't mentioned at all. She told herself it didn't matter. They were a team. His success was their success. Now, sitting in an apartment where the police sirens were a lullaby, she understood. Raymond had been writing her out of the story the entire time. The informal consulting arrangement. The insistence that she didn't need business cards or a title. The gentle suggestions that maybe she should focus on supporting the ecosystem rather than taking credit. He'd been preparing to erase her from the beginning. Grace's phone buzzed, a Google alert notification. She'd set them up weeks ago when she first sensed the divorce coming. The headline made her breath catch. Adams Dynamics finalizes historic merger with Helix Technologies. 2.3 deal positions Raymond Adams as tech's newest billionaire. She clicked through. The article was glowing. Raymond's photo showed him confident, visionary, unstoppable. There was a paragraph about his amicable divorce and his ex-wife's decision to step away from public life to pursue personal interests. Personal interests, as if she'd chosen this erasure. But it was the final paragraph that made Grace's hands go cold. The merger, pending final regulatory approval, will close within 60 days. Adams stated that once finalized, the combined entity will be untouchable in the market. Industry analysts agree, calling the deal a masterstroke that positions Adams Dynamics beyond reach of competitors and potentially beyond scrutiny. 60 days. In 60 days, Raymond would have billions, political connections, legal shields built from money and influence. In 60 days, whatever he'd done, whatever documents he'd forged with her signature, would be protected by walls she could never climb. Grace set down her phone and looked around her tiny apartment. She had no money, no reputation, no proof she'd ever contributed anything worth remembering. But she had 60 days. And she had something Raymond had forgotten he'd given her. Access to every password, every backup server, every hidden file he'd assumed she was too uninterested to notice. Silence wasn't surrender. Sometimes it was just the sound of someone getting ready. The co-working space stayed open until midnight, which made it perfect for people who had nowhere better to be. Grace had spent 7 hours at a shared desk in the back corner, applying for contract positions under G. Smith, marketing consultant, content strategist, business analyst, anything that didn't require references from the last 5 years. Her coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but refills cost $4, and she was rationing the $180 she'd earned from a one-day data entry gig. The rain had started around 10, the kind that turned San Francisco streets into reflecting pools of neon and headlights. Grace finally closed her laptop at 11:47 p.m. 13 applications submitted. Maybe 2 would respond, maybe none. She was reaching for her coat when she heard the sound. Not a crash, not a scream, just a quiet, wet thump like a bag of groceries hitting linoleum. Grace looked toward the elevator bank. An elderly woman lay crumpled on the floor, one arm twisted beneath her at an angle that made Grace's stomach turn. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Her lips had a grayish tint that looked wrong even in the harsh fluorescent lighting. 2 people stood nearby. A man in tech startup casual, hoodie, expensive sneakers, had his phone out but wasn't dialing. A woman with noise-canceling headphones had pulled them down and was staring with the frozen uncertainty of someone hoping somebody else would handle it. "Did someone call 911?" Grace asked, already moving. The man blinked. "I was just, should we move her?" "No." Grace knelt beside the woman, careful not to jostle her. She checked for breathing, for pulse. Both present but wrong, too fast, too shallow. The woman's eyes were open but unfocused, her pupils different sizes. Grace pulled out her phone and dialed with one hand while using the other to gently support the woman's head. 911, what's your emergency? She gave the address, described the symptoms with clinical precision she didn't know she remembered from a college first aid course a decade ago. Altered consciousness, unequal pupils, possible head trauma. The dispatcher told her to keep the woman still and comfortable. "Is she going to be okay?" the hoodie guy asked. "I don't know," Grace said honestly. She took off her coat and draped it over the woman, whose skin felt cold and papery. "But someone should stay with her." The guy nodded but didn't kneel. The woman with headphones had already retreated to her desk. Grace stayed. The woman's eyes focused briefly, landing on Grace's face. Her lips moved. Grace leaned closer. "Cold," the woman whispered. "I know help is coming. You're going to be fine." "Cold, always cold in hospitals." Grace took the woman's hand. It felt like holding a bird. "Then I'll make sure they give you extra blankets." The paramedics arrived 9 minutes later, efficient and professional. They stabilized the woman, loaded her onto a stretcher, ran through protocols Grace didn't understand. One of them turned to Grace. "You did good, family." "No, I was here." "You coming to the hospital? She's asking for you." Grace looked at her laptop bag, her dead phone charger still on the desk, the contract applications she needed to follow up on in the morning. She had exactly 0 reasons to spend the night in a hospital emergency room with a stranger. "Yes," Grace said. San Francisco General smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Grace sat in an orange plastic chair in the ER waiting area, still wearing yesterday's clothes, while doctors ran tests on a woman whose name she didn't know. The nurse who finally emerged looked exhausted. "She's stable. Severe dehydration, possible TIA mini-stroke. We're keeping her for observation." She paused. "She keeps asking if you're still here." "Can I see her?" The woman, small and bird-boned in the hospital bed, with silver hair and eyes that looked sharper than they had any right to, smiled when Grace entered. "You stayed," she said. "I said I'd make sure you got extra blankets." "And did I?" 3, Grace confirmed. "I was very insistent." The woman's laugh was surprisingly robust. "What's your name, dear?" "Grace Smith." Alina Blackwell. She said it simply, like it shouldn't mean anything. Thank you, Grace Smith. Most people would have called and left. Most people probably have somewhere to be. Alina's eyes sharpened, and you don't. Grace should have deflected, should have made polite conversation and gracefully exited. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. Not really, not anymore. Alina studied her for a long moment. Sit. Tell an old woman a story. I've been bored out of my mind, and the nurses keep talking about their dadding lives like I'm already dead. So Grace sat, and because exhaustion had stripped away her usual filters, because this woman was a stranger who'd never heard of Raymond Adams or Adams dynamics, Grace talked. Not about everything, not about the forged documents or the frozen accounts, but about the shape of loss, about being erased, about starting over in a city that had stopped recognizing her name. Alina listened without interrupting, without offering the hollow reassurances strangers usually did. When Grace finally stopped, Alina nodded once. You're stronger than you think you are. I don't feel strong. No one strong ever does, Alina said. That's how you know it's real. Grace left the hospital at 4:17 a.m., caught the first bus back to the Tenderloin, and collapsed into sleep still wearing her clothes. She woke to someone knocking on her door. The man standing in the hallway wore a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He was perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair and eyes that assessed her with the same clinical precision she'd used checking Alina's vital signs. Ms. Smith, my name is Victor Blackwell. Grace's brain, still foggy with sleep, took a moment to connect the surname. Alina, is she okay? Resting comfortably, they're releasing her this afternoon. He paused. She asked me to find you. I'd like to speak with you if you have time. Grace was very aware of her wrinkled clothes, her tiny apartment visible behind her, the general disaster of her current existence. I'm not sure what. I know who you are, Victor said quietly. And more importantly, I know what you walked away from. Something in his tone made Grace step back, letting him in. Victor didn't sit. He stood by the window overlooking the street, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but attention laser-focused. My grandmother doesn't make connections easily. She's particular about people, but she called me this morning and said, find the woman who stayed. He turned to face Grace. So I looked into you. There's not much to find, Grace said carefully. On the contrary, there's a great deal to find. It's just been very carefully hidden. Victor pulled out a tablet, tapped it once, and handed it to Grace. Adams Dynamics, the Helix merger, and several offshore accounts with transactions that required authorized signatures. Grace looked at the screen. Financial documents, wire transfers, shell company formations. And there, on signature line after signature line, was her name in handwriting that looked exactly like hers. I've never seen these documents, Grace whispered. I know, Victor said. The forensic analysis makes that clear, but they're very convincing. And if regulators discover them before you do, they won't ask questions. They'll simply assume guilt. Grace's hands had gone numb. Why are you showing me this? Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, calculation giving way to something almost like respect. Because my grandmother was right about you, you stayed. Not because you had to, not because there was anything in it for you, because someone needed help and you helped. He took the tablet back. Raymond Adams is 60 days away from becoming legally untouchable. These documents are his insurance policy. If anyone looks too closely at the merger, you become the scapegoat. What do I do? Grace asked. Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he asked the question that would change everything. That depends. Do you want to disappear, or do you want to dismantle him? Victor returned 3 hours later with a team. Not a large team. Just 2 people who moved through Grace's tiny apartment with the quiet efficiency of surgeons. A woman in her 40s with steel-rimmed glasses set up what looked like a portable server on Grace's kitchen counter. A younger man in pristine business casual swept the apartment with a device that beeped occasionally, checking for surveillance. "You think he's listening?" Grace asked. "Raymond Adams is thorough," Victor said. "We should be too." The sweep came back clean. The woman with the glasses, introduced only as Dr. Chen, connected her laptop to an external monitor and gestured for Grace to sit. "What you're about to see is the result of 3 years of forensic accounting," Dr. Chen said without preamble. "We've been tracking Adams' dynamics since their Series C funding round. There were irregularities, nothing prosecutable but enough to keep watching." The screen filled with a network diagram that looked like a spider web drawn by someone on stimulants. Companies connected to companies, connected to offshore accounts, connected to shell corporations. "This," Dr. Chen said, highlighting a cluster in the center, "is the legitimate structure of Adams' dynamics. Standard tech startup architecture, holding companies, IP subsidiaries, international licensing entities. All legal, all properly documented." She zoomed out. The web expanded, revealing dozens of additional connections in red. "This is everything else." Grace leaned forward. The red connections branched out like capillaries, each leading to entities with names that meant nothing. Meridian Solutions LLC, Pacific Rim Holdings, Cascade Investment Partners. "Shell companies?" Grace asked. "Worse," Victor said. "Front companies. They provide real services, generate real revenue, just enough legitimacy to pass surface-level audits, but their primary function is to move money that shouldn't be moved." Dr. Chen pulled up a transaction log. Hundreds of entries, each showing money flowing from Adams' dynamics to these various entities, then fragmenting further, bouncing through foreign banks, cryptocurrency exchanges, and back into what looked like personal accounts. "How much?" Grace asked. "47 million over 3 years, Dr. Chen said, "give or take." The number hit Grace like a physical weight. He's been stealing from his own company. "Not exactly," Victor said. "He's been preparing for multiple scenarios. If Adams' dynamics succeeds, he's positioned to extract value before anyone else profits. If it fails, he has a comfortable safety net. And if regulators ever investigate." Dr. Chen clicked to a new screen. Grace's signature appeared over and over and over. Wire authorization forms, corporate resolutions, partnership agreements. "He frames you," Grace finished, her voice hollow. "Look at the dates," Dr. Chen said. Grace scanned the documents. The earliest was from 4 years ago, 2 months after their wedding. The most recent was dated 3 weeks before Raymond served divorce papers. "He's been building this for our entire marriage," Grace said. "Not quite." Victor moved to stand beside the monitor. "He's been building it since before your marriage. Look at the signature progression." Dr. Chen zoomed in on the earliest documents. The signature was close to Grace's but not perfect. The G was too flourished, the C too sharp. Then she showed the next set 6 months later. Better, closer. By the third set, a year into the marriage, the signatures were nearly identical. "He practiced," Grace said, feeling sick. "He refined," Victor corrected. "These early documents wouldn't survive forensic analysis, but by year 2 of your marriage, he'd perfected it. Every signature from that point forward is nearly indistinguishable from your authentic hand." Grace thought about the birthday cards Raymond used to give her. Always handwritten. Always asking her to sign her name on thank you notes for gifts from his business associates. She'd thought it was sweet that he wanted them to be from both of them. He'd been studying her handwriting. "The divorce timing wasn't about the prenup," Grace said slowly, pieces clicking together. "It was about the merger." "Partially," Victor said. "The Helix merger provides Raymond with 2 things, immense wealth and political insulation. Once he's worth over $2 billion, he becomes too important to prosecute without ironclad evidence. His attorneys will be the best. His connections will span industries and governments. But Grace sensed there was more. Dr. Chen pulled up a timeline. Red markers indicated the dates of the fraudulent transactions. Blue markers showed Adams Dynamics funding rounds and major contracts. Green markers showed personal milestones, Grace's wedding, anniversaries, the divorce filing. The divorce serves a second purpose, Dr. Chen said. It creates distance. You're no longer an insider with potential knowledge of operations. You're a bitter ex-wife with motivation to lie. If you come forward with accusations, Raymond's team paints you as vindictive, unstable, a woman scorned seeking revenge. And if I stayed quiet, these documents stay hidden until regulators find them years from now, Grace said. By which time, the trail leads only to me. Exactly. Victor's voice was grim. You'd be easy to prosecute. No resources for a proper defense. No alibi since you genuinely were involved in the company, even if informally. And Raymond's records would show he tried to keep you out of operations, tried to protect the company from your interference. Grace stood and walked to her window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the street below into watercolor smears. The SEC called me, right after I signed the papers. They said there were documents with my signature. They're building a preliminary inquiry, Victor said. Nothing formal yet. But once the merger closes and Adams Dynamics becomes Helix Adams, the combined entity will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. The SEC will dig deeper, and they'll find these. How long do I have? The merger closes in 53 days, Victor said. The SEC investigation will likely go public within 90 days of the merger closing. You'll be named within a week of that. Grace did the math. Roughly 5 months before her life became a criminal case study. 5 months before Raymond's insurance policy activated and destroyed whatever remained of her existence. You said earlier that my silence saved me, Grace said, not turning from the window. What did you mean? Victor joined her at the window. If you'd fought the divorce, Raymond would have accelerated this. Created a scandal, planted evidence of financial impropriety, forced you into a position where defending yourself meant exposing yourself. Your quiet acceptance confused him, made him careful. He's watching to see if you'll break silence. I have nothing, Grace said. No money, no credibility, no way to fight someone with his resources. You have something better, Victor said. You have the truth, and you have something Raymond never counted on. What's that? A witness who knows what really happened, you. Grace turned to face him. Victor Blackwell looked exactly like what he was. Old money, quiet power, the kind of person who didn't need to prove anything because everyone already knew. But there was something else in his expression now. Something that looked almost like anger. Why are you helping me? Grace asked. Your grandmother is safe. You don't owe me anything. My grandmother spent 40 years watching her husband build an empire through integrity, Victor said. When he died, vultures tried to tear it apart. She fought them off alone because people assumed a widow would be easy prey. They were wrong. He paused. She sees something of herself in you, and she's rarely wrong about people. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. We need a decision. If we're moving forward, we need to move now. Raymond's team is competent. They'll notice if we start pulling documentation. Victor turned to Grace with an expression of perfect calm. You have 3 options. First, disappear. I can relocate you. New identity, clean financial start, somewhere Raymond's reach doesn't extend. You'd be safe, but you'd live knowing he won. Grace's jaw tightened. Second option, fight him legally. Use what we've found to build a defense. Wait for the SEC investigation, prove your innocence. It would take years, cost millions, and success isn't guaranteed. And the third option, Grace asked, though she already knew. Victor's smile was cold and precise. We don't wait for the SEC. We don't play defense. We build an offensive that dismantles everything Raymond has built, piece by piece, using the very weapons he forged to destroy you. Grace looked at the monitor still displaying the web of shell companies, forged signatures, stolen millions. She thought about 5 years of being erased, minimized, written out of her own story. She thought about Raymond's face when he'd slid the divorce papers across that table, so certain of his victory. She thought about the 60 days he had left to become untouchable. "I want to dismantle him," Grace said. Victor nodded once, as if that was the answer he'd expected all along. "Then we have work to do, and Grace, from this moment forward you're not fighting to prove your innocence. You're fighting to expose his guilt." Dr. Chen was already typing, pulling up new documents, creating folders with labels like evidence chain and timeline reconstruction. Victor extended his hand. Grace shook it. "One rule," Victor said. "Once we start this, we don't stop. No matter what Raymond throws at us, no matter how ugly it gets, we see it through to the end." "Agreed," Grace said. "Good." Victor checked his watch. "You have 53 days to become the most dangerous person Raymond Adams has ever underestimated. Let's get started." The conference room Victor provided was in a building Grace had walked past 1,000 times without noticing. No signage, no lobby directory, just a keycard reader and an elevator that required biometric confirmation. The room itself was all glass and steel, with a view of the bay that made her old life feel like something that had happened to someone else. "First lesson," said the woman standing at the head of the table. "Stop apologizing." Her name was Rebecca Moss, former federal prosecutor, 23 years taking down white-collar criminals who thought money made them immune. She wore her gray hair short and her expression shorter. "I wasn't," Grace started. "You walked in and said, 'Sorry, I'm late,' even though you're 4 minutes early. You said sorry when you asked where to sit. You apologized for asking if there was water." Rebecca leaned forward. "In the next 48 days, you will be in rooms with people who want to destroy you. Every apology is blood in the water. Stop bleeding." Grace opened her mouth, caught herself about to say sorry and closed it. Rebecca smiled. "Better. Now, tell me everything you know about Raymond Adams' business operations." For 3 hours, Grace talked. Rebecca recorded everything, stopping her occasionally to drill down on details Grace didn't think mattered. The name of Raymond's assistant, his preferred coffee shop, the fact that he always took calls from certain investors in his car, never in the office. "Why does that matter?" Grace asked. "Because men like Raymond compartmentalize their crimes," Rebecca said. "He has clean spaces and dirty spaces. The car is mobile, private, harder to surveil. If he's taking calls there, those are the calls we want to know about." She pulled up a photograph. Raymond at a restaurant with a man Grace didn't recognize. "Who is this?" "I don't know." "Look closer." Grace studied the image. The man was older, expensive watch, but his suit was slightly off, good quality but not bespoke. His posture was too careful. He looks nervous. His name is Marcus Webb, VP of Regulatory Compliance at Helix Technologies. He's been meeting with Raymond once a month for 6 months, always at restaurants, always cash payments, never logged as business meetings. Rebecca's eyes were sharp. "What does that tell you?" "Raymond's buying compliance oversight," Grace said slowly. "Or buying someone to look the other way when he needs them to. Keep going. What else?" The training was relentless. Rebecca taught Grace to read body language, to spot tells, to identify when someone was following a script versus speaking spontaneously. She showed Grace how depositions worked, how attorneys would try to trap her with her own words, how silence could be weaponized just as effectively as speech. "You're naturally calm," Rebecca said on the 3rd day. "That's your greatest asset, but calm without strategy is just paralysis. I'm teaching you to make your calm terrifying." Dr. Chen's sessions were different, less psychological, more surgical. Financial crimes are just stories told in numbers, she explained, pulling up the first shell company document. Your job is to learn to read the story, then rewrite it. She walked Grace through the anatomy of money laundering, how legitimate businesses could mask illegitimate transfers, how cryptocurrency transactions could obscure paper trails, how timing mattered as much as amounts. See this? Dr. Chen highlighted a $47,000 wire transfer from Adams Dynamics to Meridian Solutions. $47,000 is just under the threshold that triggers automatic reporting. Raymond knows the regulations. He stays under the radar by staying under the limits. But there are dozens of these, Grace said, scanning the spreadsheet. Exactly. Small enough to avoid individual scrutiny. Large enough to add up to millions over time. This is sophisticated theft. It requires planning, patience, and detailed knowledge of regulatory frameworks. Grace studied the patterns. Transfers always occurred on Fridays, always to different entities, always in amounts between $35,000 and $49,000. He's automating it, Grace said suddenly. Dr. Chen looked up sharply. Explain. Raymond hates repetitive tasks. He'd never manually initiate dozens of transfers. He'd build a system, set parameters, let it run, which means there's a program somewhere. Code, a digital trail. Dr. Chen's smile was predatory. Now you're thinking like a prosecutor. Find the system, you prove intent. Prove intent, you prove conspiracy. For 6 days, Grace lived in spreadsheets. She learned to build financial models, to trace money through multiple jurisdictions, to identify patterns in noise. Her eyes burned. Her head ached. But she started seeing the architecture beneath Raymond's empire and seeing where it was vulnerable. The media coaching came from a man named James Cho, who'd spent 15 years as a crisis communications consultant for Fortune 500 executives. You have a problem, James said, watching footage of Grace from a charity event 3 years ago. On screen, Grace stood slightly behind Raymond, smiling politely, fading into the background. You're forgettable. Thanks, Grace said dryly. That was your survival mechanism. Be small, be quiet, don't attract attention. It kept you safe, but now we need the opposite. James pulled up a different video, a female CEO testifying before Congress. Watch her. What do you see? Grace studied the woman. Impeccable posture, direct eye contact, measured responses, confidence. Wrong, control. James paused the video. She's not confident, she's terrified, but she controls the narrative by controlling her presence. Posture, tone, pace. She makes the questioners react to her, not the other way around. For days, James drilled Grace on camera presence. How to sit, how to stand, how to make silence work for her instead of against her. He taught her the power of the 3-second pause before answering, how it made listeners lean in. He showed her how to deflect hostile questions by bridging to her own message. Raymond will attack your character, James said. He'll call you bitter, unstable, vindictive. Your job isn't to defend yourself, it's to redirect. To what? To his actions. Every time someone asks about your emotions, you respond with his facts. I understand Mr. Adams has characterized me that way. What he hasn't characterized is the $47 million in undisclosed transactions bearing forged signatures. You see, you don't engage the personal, you pivot to the provable. Grace practiced until the responses became automatic, until she could maintain perfect calm while James threw increasingly hostile questions at her, until she stopped flinching. On day 12, Victor brought in Dr. Sarah Winters, a forensic psychologist who specialized in profiling high-functioning narcissists. Tell me about your marriage, Dr. Winters said. Grace talked about the early days when Raymond had seemed genuinely interested in her opinions, about the gradual shift toward dismissiveness, about how he'd rewrite history, claiming credit for ideas she'd originated, until she started doubting her own memories. Classic narcissistic manipulation, Dr. Winters said. He was grooming you to be dependent on his version of reality. But here's what he didn't count on. You kept your own receipts, emails, documents, your own memory independent of his narrative. Dr. Winters pulled up a behavioral analysis. Raymond operates on a predictable pattern. When threatened, he escalates aggression. When questioned, he deflects to authority, lawyers, experts, credentials. When cornered, he burns bridges and blames others. She looked at Grace. You need to predict his moves before he makes them. They spent hours wargaming scenarios. If Grace went public, Raymond would claim she was mentally unstable, so they prepared medical records and character witnesses. If she presented evidence, Raymond would claim she'd stolen it, so they documented legal acquisition of every document. If she testified, Raymond would try to destroy her credibility, so they built an unassailable timeline. You're not just building a case, Dr. Winters said. You're building a psychological trap. Every move Raymond makes in response to you should tighten the noose. His own instincts will destroy him. On day 21, Grace looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The stylist Victor had sent, a woman named Michaela who worked with executives preparing for hostile takeovers, had stripped away every soft edge. Grace's hair was shorter, sharper. Her wardrobe was precision-tailored, not expensive for show, but expensive for fit. Every piece designed to photograph well, to read as competent rather than aggressive. You're not trying to be someone else, Michaela said. You're revealing who you've always been underneath the camouflage. Grace studied her reflection. The woman looking back wasn't the discarded wife from the divorce papers, wasn't the ghost who'd signed her life away in a glass restaurant. This woman looked like she belonged in boardrooms, like she kept score and remembered slights. Like someone Raymond Adams should have been afraid of all along. On day 37, Victor called an emergency meeting. Rebecca, Dr. Chen, James, and Dr. Winters were all there. Victor pulled up a press release on the main screen. Raymond just announced the date, Victor said. Grace read the headline. Adams Dynamics and Helix Technologies to celebrate historic merger at San Francisco Courthouse. Public announcement scheduled for March 15th. 16 days away. He's doing it at the courthouse, Grace said softly, where he filed for divorce, where he thinks he won. He's making a statement, Rebecca said, reclaiming the space, showing he's untouchable. Grace stood and walked to the window. The city spread out below her, lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. Somewhere out there, Raymond was planning his victory speech, calling in favors, polishing his narrative. He had no idea she'd spent 37 days becoming dangerous. We'll be ready, Grace said, turning back to the team. Victor's smile was cold and approving. Yes, we will. The courthouse steps looked like a film premiere. Cameras lined the perimeter, reporters checking microphones, feeding live updates. A crowd had gathered behind police barriers, tech enthusiasts, financial bloggers, people who'd followed the Adams Dynamics story and wanted to witness history. Raymond Adams stood at the podium in a charcoal Tom Ford suit, looking exactly like a man who'd won everything. Behind him, a banner displayed both company logos joined by a sleek infinity symbol. Grace watched from a car 2 blocks away, parked where she could see without being seen. He chose the exact spot, she said quietly. Victor sat beside her, perfectly still, the spot where he filed for divorce. Down to the same steps, he's rewriting the location, erasing me from it a second time. Grace's voice was steady, clinical. Not today. On the courthouse steps, Raymond leaned into the microphone. Today marks not just a merger of companies, but a merger of visions. Adams Dynamics and Helix Technologies are defining the future itself. Applause rippled through the crowd. Grace checked her watch, 45 seconds. The journey here wasn't easy, Raymond continued, his tone shifting to something vulnerable. Building a company requires sacrifice, difficult choices, but I've always believed that integrity matters more than comfort. Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. He was using her erasure as character development, the difficult choice, the sacrifice. And that's why I'm proud to announce that as of 9 a.m. this morning, the merger is officially complete. Adams Helix is now the fifth largest technology company in North America, valued at $2.3 billion. The applause was louder this time. Raymond had won, and everyone was witnessing it. Grace reached for the door handle. "Wait," Victor said, watching his phone. 3, 2, 1. The sound hit first. A deep, mechanical thrum that cut through the applause and made people look up instinctively. The sound grew louder, vibrating in chests. Raymond faltered mid-sentence. His smile held, but his eyes shifted skyward, confused. A helicopter appeared over the buildings, descending toward the courthouse roof. Behind it, dropping lower, a Bombardier Global 7500 began its final approach to the executive strip 2 blocks away, close enough that its shadow swept across the plaza like an eclipse. Phones came up, cameras swiveled. The reporters focused on Raymond suddenly had a better story. The jet touched down with barely a sound. A ground crew materialized, positioning stairs, rolling out what looked absurdly like a red carpet. Raymond's PR director whispered urgently in his ear. Grace could see it, the first crack in his confidence. "Now," Victor said. Grace stepped out of the car. The suit was cream, tailored so precisely it looked painted on. The kind of fit that cost 5 figures and whispered old money. The handbag was red, deliberate, unmissable. Her hair pulled back in a low chignon, severe, elegant, showing her face completely. Diamond studs, her grandmother's, the only jewelry she'd kept. She walked toward the courthouse with unhurried precision. Not fast, not slow, inevitable. The crowd noticed her before Raymond did. Phones tilted toward her. Reporters started speaking rapidly into cameras. Then someone said her name. "That's Grace Smith, Raymond Adams' ex-wife." "Oh my God, that's her." Raymond heard it. Grace watched his face as the information hit, watched the exact moment he recognized her, watched his brain try to process how this was possible. His mouth opened. His hand flew to his head, fingers splaying across his hair in pure disbelief. His other hand gripped the podium so hard his knuckles went white. Grace kept walking. Behind her, Victor Blackwell descended from the jet, flanked by Margaret Chen, Deputy Director of the SEC's Enforcement Division, and James Morrison, Assistant U.S. Attorney. They wore suits that cost as much as Raymond's, carried themselves with quiet authority. The crowd recognized them too. "That's Victor Blackwell. Why is the SEC here?" Raymond tried to speak. His voice came out wrong, too loud, too sharp. "Grace, what are you? This is a private corporate event." Grace stopped 10 feet from the podium. The plaza had gone silent. She looked at Raymond, really looked at him the way he'd never looked at her. When she spoke, her voice carried without effort, calm, clear, utterly controlled. "Hello, Raymond." 2 words, that's all she said. 2 words that landed like a detonation. Grace turned slightly, addressing the cameras now. "I apologize for the interruption, but there are some irregularities regarding this merger that require immediate attention." "Irregularities?" Raymond found his voice. "Grace, I understand you're upset about how things ended between us, but this has nothing to do with our marriage," Grace interrupted, almost gentle, almost pitying. "This is about $47 million in undisclosed transactions, about shell companies and forged signatures, about documents bearing my name that I've never seen." The cameras went wild. Raymond's face did something complicated: shock, rage, calculation, fear. "That's absurd. You're clearly not well, Grace. The divorce was difficult, I understand that, but making false accusations. I'm not making accusations, Grace said. I'm presenting evidence. Victor stepped forward, holding a tablet. Behind him, Margaret Chen and James Morrison moved closer to the podium. Raymond saw them, really saw them. His hand went back to his head, both hands now, like he was trying to hold his skull together. No, he said. No, you can't just. Mr. Adams, Margaret Chen's voice cut through his stammering like a scalpel. We have some questions about Adams Dynamics financial disclosures. We can do this here, or we can do this in a more private setting. Your choice. The Helix executives were already moving away from the podium, putting physical distance between themselves and Raymond. Raymond stared at Grace with something beyond anger, beyond betrayal. You were nothing, he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. I made you. Everything you had was because of me. Grace smiled. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't triumphant, it was simply final. I was quiet, she said. You mistook that for nothing. She stepped aside. Behind her, moving with practiced coordination, 4 federal agents in FBI windbreakers emerged from vehicles parked around the plaza. They moved toward Raymond with the calm inevitability of a closing door. The cameras caught everything: Raymond's face, the agents' badges, the exact moment he understood that this wasn't a negotiation or a PR crisis or something his lawyers could fix. This was the end. Raymond Adams, the lead agent said, reaching the podium, we have a warrant for your arrest. The handcuffs clicked with a sound, impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Raymond Adams stood frozen at the podium, wrists behind his back, while the lead FBI agent read him his rights. The words were familiar from TV shows, but hearing them here, on these steps, with cameras broadcasting live, made them sound foreign. Grace watched from 10 feet away, expression unchanged. Raymond's lawyers surged forward, voices raised. This is highly irregular, the lead attorney shouted. We haven't been notified of any formal charges. Mr. Brennan, James Morrison stepped forward, voice carrying the weight of the U.S. Attorney's office. Your client is being arrested pursuant to a sealed federal warrant. You'll receive full documentation within the hour. Margaret Chen moved to the podium microphone. At 9:47 a.m. this morning, the Securities and Exchange Commission filed emergency enforcement actions against Raymond Adams and Adams Dynamics for securities fraud, wire fraud, and multiple violations of federal disclosure requirements. On the screen behind them, new images appeared: bank statements, wire transfers, forged signatures bearing Grace's name, shell company documents, a network diagram showing $47 million flowing into offshore accounts. These documents show a systematic effort to defraud investors spanning 3 years, Chen continued. Additionally, at 9:50 a.m., the SEC executed an emergency asset freeze on all accounts associated with Raymond Adams and Adams Dynamics. Raymond's head snapped up. You can't, the company has payroll. Which is why we've appointed a temporary receiver, Chen said calmly. Your personal accounts, however, are fully frozen. Raymond understood. Everything he'd extracted, everything he'd hidden, locked down. He had nothing. His eyes found Grace's. The hatred was expected. The fear was satisfying. But there was desperate need to understand how this had happened. Grace held his stare for 3 seconds, then turned and walked away. They brought Raymond to a holding room in the courthouse. His lawyers had demanded a moment to confer, standard procedure. Grace wasn't supposed to be there, but Victor Blackwell had friends in the U.S. Attorney's office. They gave her 5 minutes. Raymond looked up, still in handcuffs, still in the Tom Ford suit that now looked like a costume. Grace stepped inside. The door closed. Raymond's laugh was bitter, come to gloat. No, Grace said simply, remaining standing. I came to answer the question I can see you're still asking. How? So tell me. I stayed, Grace said. I helped someone who needed help. I didn't ask for anything in return. She paused. You wouldn't understand that. You've never done anything without calculating the return. This is about the divorce you couldn't accept. The divorce saved my life, Grace interrupted, almost gentle. If I'd stayed, I'd have been complicit. But you divorced me, Raymond. You erased me from company records. You made it impossible for anyone to believe I knew what you were doing. She watched him process this. The forged signatures were meant to frame me, but you needed them convincing. So you divorced me first, created the narrative of the bitter ex-wife. You thought that would make me easy to discredit. She smiled without warmth. Instead, it made your forgeries obvious. Why would a woman who wanted nothing from you suddenly commit fraud? The timeline didn't work. And once forensic analysts looked closely, they found the practice signatures, the evidence that you'd been planning this for years. Raymond's face went pale. You destroyed everything I built. No, Grace said. I exposed what you stole. There's a difference. Raymond lunged forward. You were nothing, a nobody I gave everything to. I was quiet, Grace said, cutting through his rage with perfect calm. You mistook that for weakness, for nothing. She met his eyes. That was your first mistake. Your last one was thinking I'd stay quiet forever. She moved toward the door. Grace, his voice changed, becoming smaller, almost pleading. We were good once. We were happy. You remember that. Grace looked at him one last time. I remember being useful to you, she said. I'm not sure that's the same as happy. She knocked. The agent opened the door. Grace walked out without looking back. Behind her, Raymond called her name once more, desperate and broken. The door closed on the sound. 6 months later, Raymond Adams received 12 years. The judge was unmoved by pleas for leniency. Mr. Adams didn't make a mistake, Judge Patricia Reeves said. He built a systematic criminal enterprise. He showed no remorse until confronted with irrefutable evidence. Grace watched from the gallery, seated next to Victor. She felt nothing, not triumph, just quiet certainty of a closed chapter. Raymond was led away. He didn't look at her. 1 year later, the office Victor gave her overlooked the bay from the 42nd floor of Blackwell Tower. Her title, Senior Partner, Ethical Acquisitions Division. In 6 months, she'd restructured how Blackwell Industries approached mergers. Every deal now underwent forensic analysis. Grace had built a team of former prosecutors and financial crimes experts who could identify fraud before it infected Blackwell's portfolio. They'd killed 3 major deals in the first quarter, transactions that looked profitable but showed troubling signs beneath the surface. Now the board listened when Grace said no. The Forbes article came out in month 7, Grace Smith, From a Race to Essential. Raymond Adams was mentioned, of course, but only in the context of Grace's story, only as the thing she'd overcome. He'd become a footnote in her narrative. Eleanor Blackwell's birthday party was elegant, a small gathering at the estate, attended by people whose combined net worth could fund a small nation. Grace stood on the terrace, champagne in hand, watching bay lights reflect off the water. You look contemplative, Victor said, joining her. Just thinking about timing. If I hadn't stayed late that night, if your grandmother hadn't collapsed in that specific building. You wouldn't have walked past, Victor said. That's not who you are. Raymond would have. Yes, and that's why you're here and he's in federal prison. They stood in comfortable silence. I received a letter last week, Grace said, from Raymond. Victor's eyebrow rose, and I didn't open it, had it forwarded back unopened. Good. He doesn't get my attention anymore, Grace said quietly. He doesn't get my anger or my forgiveness or my closure. He just doesn't get me. Victor nodded. That's more devastating than any revenge you could have taken. Grace thought about Raymond in his cell, still trying to understand how he'd lost, still believing he was the main character in a story that had already ended. She didn't hate him. She didn't think about him at all unless reminded. And that was the truest victory. "Come on," Alina called from inside. "They're about to sing, and I need allies against this indignity." Grace followed Victor back inside, into warmth and laughter and a life she'd built from nothing. The woman who'd signed divorce papers in silence had become the woman who decided which empires deserved to stand. She hadn't fought to keep what Raymond gave her. She'd positioned herself to take what he'd stolen from everyone and built something better from the ruins. Thank you for watching Grace's incredible journey from silence to strength. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful tale of revenge, redemption, and resilience. Which moment hit you hardest? Drop a comment below. More amazing stories coming soon. Stay tuned.